Hello, morning.
Hi.
Yeah, so I think
Good morning, Rob.
Good
morning.
Yeah.
How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Hey, okay, I think it will be evening for you, right? I think we need to wait a bit because a second wave of COVID started just now. So we are again in lockdown.
Uh-oh, that's not good.
Yeah, so we come back to the restriction alert. 2 people maximum can go outside in this week.
That's not fun. I went to the grocery store for the first time in a year the other day, and it was fun, but I was like, I haven't been outside in far too long.
I think for us, we need to wait more because there are a lot of things going on. So let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically we'll start in a couple of minutes. I think let's some few more people to join, and yeah, it's Saturday morning, so I think let's see. Because we are doing this event, I think usually we do on weekdays on evening, Thursday mostly. But this is the first time we are trying to do on Saturday. So yeah.
That makes sense. And thank you for doing that. The evening ones would have been in the middle of the night for me, so this worked out real well.
Asif, can you check if Rob is presenter?
Oh yeah, I'll just make it presenter. Sorry, because last time yeah, I think it's presenter now.
Okay.
You can, Rob, you can try to share your screen and maybe can check if everything is okay.
Yeah. Screen share. Let's share this one.
Yeah, we are able to see. Oh, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. That worked.
Yeah.
Let's drag this off screen. And drag this off screen.
Yeah, can see everything is fine, and it seems so.
Perfect. Is there an echo? Do I need to put on headphones?
No, I think it should be okay. So we'll start in a few minutes. I have few things to announce because I do some introduction, and then yeah, we can carry on.
Okay. Then I'll stop sharing so that you can share the main slide.
Sure. Yeah, I'll start at 11. Just sorry, it's I think 8 p.m. for you. A few minutes more.
That works.
Okay.
We're streaming to YouTube, right?
Yeah, we are streaming to YouTube as well. So
very nice.
We are streaming to YouTube.
It looks like in Teams I can either show chat or the participants, but not both.
Is it? You should be able to see. You're not able to see the chat?
I am.
Oh, okay.
But if I flip over to the participant list, then I can't anymore.
Oh. I think because you can see any one of them at one time, I think, so in Teams.
Okay. Ah, that was not the right button.
Okay. So, hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today. If you are the first time, we are Azure Singapore community, and we are part of Microsoft technical communities in Singapore. There are a couple of other communities as well in Singapore. So it's like .NET community and ML community all comes under Microsoft technical communities in Singapore. So if you are the first timer and you want to join the community, so there is a Facebook group and there is also a meetup group. So you can join by just going MS Technical Communities SG, and on the meetup group you can just type only the MS SG UG. And we also have our YouTube channel, MVP YouTube channel. So all our session recordings are available on our YouTube channel. This session is being recorded, so this section recording will be available on our YouTube. It's a live. And if you'd like to present or you like to organize the sessions, so you can contact any one of the organizer. We have done a couple of really good sessions in past, and all the session recordings are available on our YouTube channel. So in December, we have done a DevOps series that was completely all sessions related to DevOps. So if you are interested in DevOps, you can visit our YouTube Azure Singapore sessions. And if in after that we have done the API building series. So there was a 4-part series of API building. If you are interested in building the API from scratch, so that sessions might be interesting for you. And similarly, we have done for the IoT, and I think is the really good sessions. Today we are going to Rob is going to speak on Kubernetes and GitHub Actions. So yeah, so this series something is going to be more on Kubernetes and containers from today onwards. So Rob, today's session is going to be like level up your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes by Rob. Rob is a developer evangelist from US, and he is a Microsoft MVP, and he is a really good speaker, and he have done in couple of sessions and conferences he has spoke, and he is doing the presentation from 2008. And if you like to see, he have a really good background on different technologies, React, .NET, and so if you like to see all those blogs, and there are a lot of good topics available on his website, so you can just go and visit there. And in upcoming June 3rd, we are going to have 2 sessions on Kubernetes. One is on Kubernetes and second is on for your infrastructure protection. So that is on Cloud Foundry Pass for the Kubernetes by Ram Iyengar, and there will be another session by Hassan Sheikh. So protect your infrastructure with Microsoft Azure. So if you are interested any one of this topic, you can join on our meetup.com. We have already announced the session, so you can join there. And related to today's sessions, we have done a couple of sessions in past, and those session recordings are also available on our YouTube channel. So if you are interested, you can go and take a look there also. And this is our YouTube channel, MVP United Microsoft Data Office and Data Community. So you can see all the recordings are there. You can scan the QR code to join please subscribe the YouTube channel. We have also done some Chartbuster sessions in past. So yeah, all recordings are there. And before hand over to Rob, there are a few reminders. Please keep yourself on mute. If you have any questions, so you can raise hand feature. And this session is being recorded. If you like, please spread the words on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and something. Yeah. So over to you, Rob.
Very nice. Let me share my screen here. Are you able to see my screen now?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So thanks for the intro. I'm really excited to be able to share with you GitHub Actions with containers. So let me paste this here in chat. The code is online right now. Let's go there. Level up your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. Here's the repository. Ta-da! No, this repository is completely empty. We're about to fill it with a really cool website and a DevOps pipeline, and we'll deploy that DevOps pipeline to Kubernetes. We'll do that all live right now. How do you get to this repository? That URL was a little long. You can come to robrich.org, click on presentations, and here's Level Up Your DevOps with GitHub Actions and Kubernetes. It is online right now. So click through to the link and you'll get straight to this repository. While you're here on robrich.org, you can click on About Me and learn a little bit more about things that I've done recently. I'm a developer advocate for Cyril. I'm a Microsoft MVP, a friend of Redgate. AZ GiveCamp is really fun. AZ GiveCamp brings volunteer developers together with charities to build free software. We start Friday after work. Sunday afternoon, we deliver that completed software to the charities. Sleep is optional, caffeine provided. If you'd like if you're in Phoenix, come join us for the next AZ GiveCamp. Or if you'd like a GiveCamp here in Singapore or wherever you're watching from, hit me up on email or Twitter, and let's get a GiveCamp in your neighborhood too. Some of the other things that I've done, I do a lot of Docker and Kubernetes training, and I was on a .NET Rocks. I replied to a .NET Rocks podcast episode. They read my comment on the air and they sent me a mug. Woohoo! So there's my coveted .NET Rocks mug. So we want to fill up this repository. We want to build up a DevOps pipeline and push that content into containers in Kubernetes. Now, this is a completely empty GitHub repository. I have done a few things and we'll come back to that. But for the most part, yeah, this is an empty repository. I have here an empty folder. And here's a terminal that shows this is empty as well. We also see that nothing is running on our Kubernetes cluster. So let's build up a website that we can use to deploy this. If I say .NET new, then it will show me all of the things that it can build. And I could build a website, an MVC site, Angular, React, Blazor, that's pretty cool. NUnit, oh, this popped up, that's interesting. In this case, let's build a MVC site. So I'm going to say .NET new MVC. I'll give it a name of Level Up DevOps and an output folder of the current folder. Now, if I didn't use this name, it would use the current folder as the name. And if I didn't say output, it would put it into a new subfolder. But I kind of like putting it right here. Now, starting with .NET Core 3, it now does a NuGet restore as it scaffolds it. That's perfect. And now we have our website. Let's open up this website in VS Code. And now we see that we have controllers, we have views. Here's our home view. Welcome to Singapore. Now we've got our website ready to go. Oh, there it goes. We've got Visual VS Code starting to pull in the content, and now it's going to ask us, hey, do you want to add the build assets? I'm going to say yes. Now we could have just as easily come into Visual Studio and said file new project rather than scaffolding it from the command line. And we could build it inside Visual Studio, but these two files allow us to build and debug inside of VS Code. That's perfect. Now to get ready to push this into a GitHub repository, let's create a new file and we'll create a .git ignore. Now this is a period before the .git ignore. So, this is a git ignore file. Here in the git ignore file, we want to specify all of the files that we don't want to commit. So we don't want to commit bin, obj, star.user, star.suo, the .vs folder if we have one. Now we could choose whether we want to commit the VS Code folder. In this case, I'm going to say yes. Now we might exclude other files like log files or other settings files. In this case, I think that looks good. Now we've got this .git ignore. Let's work on getting this into a container. So first up, let's say new file, and this will be a .docker ignore. Now the cool thing about a .docker ignore file is it takes exactly the same syntax as a git ignore file. So let's start by just copying all of these files and pasting them in here. We don't want to get a bin, an obj, star.user, star.suo, the .vs folder inside of our production container. We also don't want the .vs code folder. We don't want appsettings.development, appsettings.development.json. We also don't want here inside properties the launch settings.json. Launch settings.json tells us about all of the details that we'll need to debug an ASP.NET website. We don't want that in our production container either. Launch settings.json. Now we could also ignore the .git folder and the .docker ignore file and the Dockerfile. Maybe we're going a little overboard there. But now we have all of the things that we don't want to end up in our repository. So now that we've got our Docker ignore file, these are everything that will never end up in our repository. Now, if I specifically ask to copy one of these files, it still won't end up in the repository. These things will be ignored. Next up, we want to create a Dockerfile. I'm going to say new file, Dockerfile. Now, it's important that this is named Dockerfile and not Dockerfile.txt. If you accidentally named it Dockerfile.txt, you can rename it and pull the .txt off and just leave it as Dockerfile. Oh, hey, VS Code gave it a nice icon. That's perfect. Now here in the Dockerfile, we have some commands that will help us with things. We have a from command, we have a copy command, we have a run command, and we have a cmd command. Now there are more commands in our Dockerfile, but if we know these 4 commands, we can pretty much read or build most Docker files. So let's do that. Let's start with the from. Now we want to build on the shoulders of giants, so this will specify our base image. Let's head off to Docker Hub and take a look at this base image. I'll search for .NET. I'll grab the .NET repository, and this now lists all of the other .NET repositories that I can look through. SDK, ASP.NET, runtime, runtime depths, monitor, samples. Samples is really interesting to be able to look at different kinds of Docker files that build different things. Runtime depths is all of the base things that we need to be able to spin up .NET. .NET runtime is great if we want to host console apps, anything that doesn't require a web server. ASP.NET builds on top of that one to add in the web hosting content. And then SDK builds on top of ASP.NET to add all the build tools. Now we want to build inside of our container. So let's start here. So let's pop open this repository, and we'll take a look at the content. Now, we're using .NET 5, so we'll use this base image. And let's scroll down a little bit and take a look at the tags that we have. Now, if I use 5.0, then I will have this built on top of Debian. But here's one that's built on top of Alpine. Alpine is a really lean, really lightweight Linux image. And so if I build on top of Alpine, then my container will be much smaller. So rather than just 5.0, let's use the 5.0-Alpine tag. Back here in our Dockerfile, let's paste that and we'll say -Alpine. Now we've built on the shoulders of giants. We have all of our build tools in our container and we're ready to copy the content into place. So I want to copy the content from my source directory. That'll be the directory where I run the Docker build command into the current directory inside my container. Now, where is that directory inside my container? Let's say work_dir is /src. Now, src, there's nothing magic about that. I could put it in tmp or var lib something or other, but src is a good way for me to know that, hey, that's my source code. I've now copied all of the content from my host machine into this, except for all the things that I specified in the Docker ignore. And now let's run some .NET console commands. .NET restore, .NET build -c release. So I'll make sure I build in release mode. .NET test will run all of our tests. And we will also do these in release mode so that we don't actually build in debug mode just to run our tests. And .NET publish -c release. And we'll give it an output folder, the /dist folder. Now, these are all of the console commands that we would want to run. And if we were doing it in the same way that we did a .NET new command, .NET new, we said .NET new MVC, --name, --output. We're going to do this in a similar way using that .NET command line. But we want to run them as Docker commands. So let's run this one, and let's run this one, and let's run this one. And that's that magic word that tells Docker to execute each of these commands. Now this last one, .NET publish, that's the same command that we would get if we right-clicked and published inside of Visual Studio. It will go collect all of those resources that we need to send to our web server and push them into this dist folder. Now we're not right-clicking inside Visual Studio, we're actually doing it inside of a DevOps pipeline, so we know that this will be really consistent. So we've done that. We've copied all of our source code. We've restored our NuGet packages, built our content, run all of our tests. If our tests failed, then this would get a non-zero status code, and we would not get any further. We wouldn't get a published website, and we wouldn't start up a new image. Now let's switch over to the work_dir/dist. We'll switch over to that dist folder where we have that content. And cmd is the command that will run as the container starts. .NET level up devops.dll. All the rest of these commands run as we're building our image. This one last command will run as we start our container. Now we do want to add a few more things here into place. We want to say that we'll set an environment variable that is ASP.NET Core environment. Environment will be production. That tells ASP.NET to turn on some optimizations where it will run more efficiently, knowing that it won't have a debugger attached. Let's also add another environment variable, ASP.NET Core URLs, and we'll say http://+80. Now this will listen on port 80, and it will listen on all interfaces. By default, ASP.NET will only listen on loopback, and we want to be able to listen to traffic from other machines as well. We also want one more, expose 80. what we're telling here is that we want Docker to accept inbound traffic on port 80. Because ASP.NET is listening on port 80, then that'll go straight into our web server and be able to run our content. Now this Dockerfile is great. We could push this into production right now and it would work just fine. But there are some inefficiencies here that we can definitely improve. We have our build tools inside of our container. We have our source code inside of our container. Now we could do something like this. Let's run rm-rf/src. That would delete all of our source code. But each of these commands is going to build a new Docker layer. And so if we remove the content in this layer, it still exists in this layer. That's not going to make our container any smaller. Instead, let's do something different. Now, I want to, let's head back over to Docker Hub. And last time we looked at the SDK, let's look at the ASP.NET runtime here. Now, this one includes the ASP.NET runtime environment, but not the build tools. Here's our image name. And scrolling down, we can also see the tags that are available here too. Now, if we choose 5.0, that's the one that we selected above. It's based on Debian, but here's an Alpine variant that is a lot smaller as well. 5.0-Alpine. Let's use that. Okay, so let's say from mcr.microsoft.com, and we'll say the Alpine variant. What we've done is we've broken our build into two pieces. Here's the first piece. Here's the second piece. Our first piece, and I'm misusing this term, we'll call this our build server image. And this one will be our production runtime server image. We've created a multi-stage build. As this one finishes, it will create our content in the dist folder, and then this will start a brand new image that we can then do interesting things with. Now, as we build this, we'll tag this last one, and we'll just throw away this first one. But we'll use this to get our build tools, to get our content built, and then we'll only copy this dist folder into place. So let's do that. I'm going to change my work dir to app instead of dist, and let's copy the content from the dist folder into that folder. Now, right now, we would look for a dist folder here on our source machine. Now, that's definitely not what we want. So let's copy this from equals build. We'll reference the build stage. Now, what is that build stage? Let's come back in here and let's say as build. This names this section as the build image. And we could also come in here and say as prod or, whatever. In this case, we aren't going to use it, so let's just not name it. But when we say from build, we're now copying that content from this build stage, the dist folder, into the current folder, which we specified here as the app folder. Now we don't have the build tools here in our image. We only have the content that we built to run on our server. Now that was one great optimization. Let's look at another great optimization. Each of these commands will create a new Docker layer, and each Docker layer will be cached. Now here I'm copying in all the files, and then I'm running a .NET Restore to restore all my NuGet packages. So that means if I come in here and I change a CS/HTML file, or if I come in here and I change a JavaScript file or a CSS file, that I will restore my NuGet packages. I really want to do this differently. I want to restore my NuGet packages first and then copy in all my content. That way, if I'm only changing a CS file, I will only start here and I'll use the cached NuGet packages. Now, I do need to copy in my manifest. So let's copy level up devops.csproj into the current folder. And now I've got my manifest. It's going to reference all of the NuGet packages that I need. Then I'll .NET Restore, cache that layer. And now as I'm making changes in my application, I can start here and only need to rebuild, test, and publish my content. I don't need to restore my NuGet packages. That's great. we now have a Docker file that will build up our content, run all of our unit tests. If all of our unit tests pass, it will continue on. And finally, it'll build out this new image where as the container starts up, it will run our site. It'll run our site on port 80 in production mode. And now we're ready to go. We've got an image that we can build. Now, I could definitely come in here and say, Docker build this image, and then I could Docker run this image, and we could see it happen here. But let's just push it up to GitHub and take a look at it up there. We do need to do one more thing, though, before we're ready to go. We need to add a Kubernetes YAML file. Now, I'm going to go reach into the project that I built last time and just go grab the Kubernetes YAML file because it's kind of involved. Here's that Kubernetes YAML file. I have a deployment. It specifies that I should have one replica, one instance of this website. I have some variables in here, image label, my Azure Container Registry URL. We'll want to replace those at build time with their current values. That means that these secrets won't end up in my source control. So here's my deployment that will start up exactly one pod. The pod will go grab that content out of Azure Container Registry and start up my container listening on port 80. I now have a Kubernetes service that will load balance across all of my, in this case, one instances. It will grab port 80 and forward that off to port 80. If I had multiple instances, multiple replicas, this would automatically round robin load balance across them using sticky sessions. Next up, I have an ingress, and this ingress will use the HTTP application routing built into Azure Kubernetes service to be able to automatically create a DNS entry for me. Now, what's that DNS entry that it will grab? Well, I'm going to go grab this .aks URL, another variable that we'll need to swap into place. Now, this is all of the things that I did last time. I want to swap this in with level up DevOps. Now, I could definitely specify other details if I had resource limits, for example, or maybe I have a health check URL that I want to put into place. But we've now got our Kubernetes YAML file. And so now let's commit this to source control. I'm going to stage all the things. Let's go look through here and make sure that we don't have any files that we don't want to commit to source control. We could make sure that we don't accidentally commit our bin and obj folder. Make sure that we don't commit any secrets here in our app settings file. Okay, so we're ready to go. Level up DevOps. I'll commit that. Now that we've commit that into source control, git log --1 line. We've got this commit ready to go. Git push. Origin main. So now I've pushed this content up to GitHub. And if we come back here into GitHub, we can refresh our repository. And we've already got the content up here in our Git repository. That is great. Grab a link to here from robrich.org, and you can get straight to this repository of code. Now we have our Dockerfile, we have our Kubernetes YAML file. Let's pivot over and start building our build. Now, I talked about how I did one thing here in this repository before we begin. I came in here to secrets, and I created a bunch of secrets. I said new repository secret. I gave it a name here. I gave it a value, and I created these secrets. Well, what secrets did I create? I created these 5 secrets. I have the URL of my Azure Container Registry, my Docker registry hosted in Azure. I have the username and password I need to be able to authenticate to that registry. I have the Kubernetes URL, the AKS URL, and the Kubernetes config file that I need to be able to authenticate. So I've created these 5 secrets, and we'll use those in the process of doing our build. Let's come in here to level up DevOps. We'll click on Actions, and let's start building our DevOps pipeline. Now, in this case, it guessed that I was building a Jekyll site. That's not quite right, but I get it. We can cruise through here looking for various templates that we can use to start up. So here's deploying a Node app to Azure Web Apps. Pardon me. We could use Terraform or OpenShift. Maybe we're deploying a Ruby or a Python mechanism. Let me show some more. And these are all just templates. Now, if I don't find a template that I like, I can definitely create a blank mechanism. But in this case, let's go find the Docker one. Docker. There we go, Docker image. I'm going to set up this workflow. Now, this is just a template. So I'm going to rename this Docker Kubernetes. And let's say Docker build and push Kubernetes apply. Now we want to do it on the main branch. And we won't do pull requests for now. We'll come back to pull requests. Now here's our build YAML, and it's going to do a bunch of things. I'm going to do multiple commands here. The first command that it does is it checks out all of our content. Now that we've got all of our source code here, we can start in on the content that we want to do. I don't need to specify my Dockerfile because it is Dockerfile, and I'll put the dot at the end here. And instead of calling it my image name, let's call it level up DevOps. But I know to be able to push it into my Docker container registry, I'll also need to put my ACR URL here. Now I want to use that secret that we put into GitHub secrets. Let's come here into the documentation where we saw how we set up those secrets. And next up, we want to be able to leverage these secrets to be able to accomplish the tasks that we need to. $, curly brace, secrets dot that name, curly brace. That's how we'll reference those secrets in our build script. Okay, so $, curly, secrets dot ACR URL, and that gets me the secret that I put into my GitHub secrets. Rather than specifying the date here, I'm also going to specify the github.sha. That is the git commit that created this content. Now, because I'm referencing it as the GitHub SHA here, we saw in our Kubernetes YAML file how we use that image label to tag our content. Now, that means that as we're looking at our resource inside Kubernetes, we know exactly what git commit created this resource. That's perfect. So I've got this. It will go run all of the commands in my Dockerfile. It will build out this image. And now I need to do a Docker push. Let's go push this entire image, and we'll push that up to our Docker registry. And now to be able to push it up to the registry, we need to know where that registry is. So we need a new task that will log us into that registry. Let's come here into the marketplace, and we will say, how do we want to get into our registry? Let's say Docker login. There's one, Docker login. Now I can come in here to the full marketplace listing, and it will show me all of the details about this. I can see how it's used. I can link to the GitHub repo that has this content in place. It'll show me about how I can use it there. That's perfect. I think I like this one. I'm going to close this back up. And here is the YAML that I'll need to be able to reference this task. I'm going to copy it and paste it in here. Now, I do need to line it up a little bit better. It didn't indent it quite right. But now that I've got this task in place, let's configure it. Now, I want to configure it with the registry URL. So let's specify secrets.acr URL. I need to give it a username. So let's say secrets.acr username. And I need to give it a password. So let's give it secrets.acr .acr password. And now I've logged into my Azure Container Registry. Now, log out. Yeah, I'll log out. Now, this logout doesn't log out at the end of this task run, but rather at the end of this entire build. Now, in this case, I'm running inside of Azure's, inside of GitHub Actions build system, so it may be less important to log out. This VM will get destroyed shortly after this build is done, but yeah, it's probably a good practice to log out. If I'm running on shared infrastructure or I have a custom job on my hardware, then logging out might be increasingly important. Okay, so now we've logged into Docker so that when we push, we know which registry to push to. That's perfect. The next thing we want to do is we want to do a kubectl apply-fks.yaml. Now this will run this content inside of our Kubernetes cluster. Well, we're going to need to log into our Kubernetes cluster so that we know which cluster to run that in. Let's head back up to the marketplace and we will search for Kubernetes set context. Ooh, Kubernetes set context. I could go look at the marketplace listing again and get a feel for how this works, but I'm just going to jump down here and copy the content. So let's copy that here and let's paste it. I'm going to need to indent it correctly. There we go. Now, oh, this isn't quite right. I picked the wrong one. This is the one that I want. There we go. This one has a lot more options. So let's delete this one and paste in this one and line it up correctly. There we go. Now this one allows me to specify more details. By default, it will use the kubeconfig method, but I could also specify other details like context, URL. Maybe I have a secret inside of my Kubernetes cluster that I need to use to authenticate, but I'll use kubeconfig in this case. So let's pull this one off. Let's pull the rest of these off. We don't need those because we're going to use the kubeconfig. And let's specify that kubeconfig. I've built that secret, secrets.kubeconfig. And so that can be our mechanism for authenticating into Kubernetes. Now that we're authenticated into Kubernetes, we'll do that kubectl apply and everything will work out great. Well, kind of. Here in our Kubernetes file, we have these URLs, these tags that we need to replace. Okay, so we have image label, we have ACR URL, we also have down here AKS URL. So let's swap those into place. Now, this is quite the sed command, so let me just copy and paste it into place. We will, inside the kds.yaml file, we're going to sed, we're going to replace, find and replace all these things. So we won't do a backup. We'll replace ACR URL with the value of the secret. We'll replace AKS URL with the value of the secret. And we're doing this globally, so it'll do it for all of them, not just the first one. And we're going to replace image label with the GitHub SHA. Now, we're doing this after we do the Docker build and push. Because what if here in my Docker ignore file, I forgot to say ignore my kds.yaml file? Because I forgot to ignore my kds.yaml file, then this kds.yaml file would end up inside my container. I definitely don't want my secrets inside my container, so I'm going to make sure I do this after I've pushed my container into my registry. So I've swapped in those secrets, I've applied that into my cluster, and that will start up the content in my repository or in my cluster. So let's come in here and let's commit. Add GitHub Actions build file. And I'm going to commit this. Now this creates a file inside my repository. It just happens to be in this .github/workflows folder, but it's just a file. If I come back in here, I can click on edit and I'll get back to that editor experience that I had. I'm going to cancel in this case, but because it's just a file in my repository, let's come back here and we'll say git pull. That's going to pull down that new file and I can pop it open inside of VS Code, and I could definitely change it here if I wanted to as well. Now I could change it inside that edit experience inside of GitHub, but I could edit it here too. That's cool. Now, because I have that file inside github.github/workflows, it's going to kick off a build. Now, it doesn't matter what that file is named, just that that file exists in that folder. Let's go and look at that build. So now this build is going to do all the steps. It logged into Docker, it logged into Kubernetes, it's going to do the Docker build command, and in this case, it pulls all of the details out of, or pulls that image from Docker Hub, and it will do our build. It will run all of our tests. Ooh, the build succeeded. That's nice. It will run all of our tests. There are no tests. It will publish, switch over into our runtime container, and it will build up that container, finally pushing that up to our Azure Container Registry, and then finally starting that image, or starting the content inside of Kubernetes. Now, we saw previously how we didn't have any content inside Kubernetes. kubectl get all. Here's my content now in Kubernetes. I've got my deployment, I've got my service, kubectl get all, and ingress, and I can see that I've also got my ingress here in place. Now, it will take a while for this DNS entry to propagate. Ooh, error image pull. We've got an error there. Let me take a look at that. kubectl describe. Which image is it looking to pull? Not found. Failed to pull and unpack image. Did I typo my image name here inside my level up DevOps? Let me come back in here and make sure I didn't typo it. Haha, I did. Let's hide. Let's replace this with level up DevOps. There we go. Now I will need to go kill all of this content. kubectl delete dash ingress / level up DevOps, because I spelled it wrong. Let's delete the service level up DevOps. And let's also delete the deployment level up DevOps, kubectl get all, and now all of that content is gone. Okay, so we got a typo. Easy enough. Let's stage this. Fix typo. Commit. And we will git push origin main. And let's watch that build go. Now that we've changed that content, let's come back up here into GitHub. Now, we could definitely go in this way and look at the details, but we can also go in this way by clicking on Actions. Here's the list of our builds that we have. In this case, we only have one build definition. We click on that and we get to see the build that is running here. So let's take a look at what that build is doing. Ooh, we already did the Docker login. We did the Kubernetes set context. Now we're pulling our image from mcr.microsoft.com. Looks like we've got that image pulled. That's great. Now we're starting to do our copy. We run .NET Restore, get all of our NuGet packages in place, copying the rest of our content. Let's do a .NET build. Ooh, our build succeeded. That's great. Let's run all of our tests. Our tests passed. Let's publish. Finish up by switching to our production container. Push that production container up to Azure Container Registry. And let's start that in Kubernetes. Great. Now our build is green. Let's do a kubectl get all, and we can see that that content is now running. Ooh, it's running. Now we'll take a minute for that DNS to propagate. So let's short circuit that a little bit. We don't want to wait for DNS. We can forward straight into our Kubernetes cluster. Now we could forward into a particular pod, or we could forward into a deployment, so it'll just randomly pick a pod. We could forward into, let's do this, forward into the service. That will prove that the service is working and that our deployment is working as well. So let's do that. We'll say kubectl port forward service / level up DevOps. We go from port 80 on our local machine to port 80 inside the service. But in case I have something running locally on port 80, I'll switch my local one to port 8080 instead. Now that I've got that, that port forward set up, let's come here to localhost 8080. And there's our website. Welcome to Singapore. Can I show a multi-project? Yes, let's do it. Now, depending on whether we choose mono repo or a repo per project, we may have a different answer. But let's definitely come back to that. Great question. So let's also add a README file into this project. I'm going to create a new file, readme.md, and let's go grab some README content. Here's some content for our README file. And wouldn't it be nice if we could show a status badge showing the status of this build? Let's come back here into GitHub and let's click on our build. And once I've chosen this build, I can come in here into this menu and I can say create status badge. Let's copy this status badge and I will set it right here in our repository. Now we've got this build file, or this README file. Now let's commit this content. We'll do this. We'll also, remember how we forgot the Kubernetes YAML file? Let's commit that as well. Add README. And let's commit this. Okay, so now that I've got it committed, git log --1 line, git push origin main. Now I've pushed this up to my main branch inside my repository, and because of that, I've changed my main branch, and it will kick off a new build. Perfect. Let's go dig into that build, and we'll get to see it do its magic. Sometimes it gets stuck here in setup jobs, so I'll just, it didn't. I jumped the gun. So it'll log into Azure Container Registry, log into Azure Kubernetes Service. It will do all of the builds, and it will be able to push all of the content into place. Our build succeeded. Now, if our build had failed at this point, our Docker command would stop. We wouldn't get that new image into our Azure Container Registry. We wouldn't update Kubernetes, and we would get a red build. That's perfect, because if our unit tests don't pass or if our build fails, then we won't get any further. The added benefit here is that we know that if our site deploys correctly, we will have passing tests. That's perfect. So we've got our content here, and now let's come back to our page, and we have this nice status page. Very nice. So we've got that build going, and we've been able to push all of our website all the way through GitHub Actions and into Kubernetes. Is there any way to reuse the dependencies which are downloaded from NuGet Restore across builds? Currently, it seems to be pulling the packages for every build. Yes, there's benefits and drawbacks to doing that. We can tell GitHub to use cached images and cached NuGet packages. That's a command that we can put into our GitHub Actions file, and that will allow it to use that cached content. Now, if we're using the cached content, we're not checking for updates. So if there's an updated version of a NuGet package that includes security fixes or bug fixes, then we wouldn't get that. So in this case, because we're misusing GitHub's bandwidth and not ours, maybe it's fine not caching those details. But if you'd like, you can definitely tweak the GitHub Actions file to say, yeah, I would actually like to cache those resources. Great question. So let's talk about a multi-project example. Now, in this case, we have all of our content inside of one folder. But let's imagine that we have multiple projects, maybe multiple folders. Now, at that point, we can tweak out our GitHub Actions file to be able to, let's get back to the GitHub Actions file, close all. Now, we're not using it in this case, but up here at the top, we can talk about the content that it's using to match our build. Now, in this case, this build is for any content on the main branch, but we could also specify that we're looking inside of a particular folder. Only kick off this build if this folder changes. So at that point, if we had multiple projects in this repository, we could have this build only apply to a single project. Now, inside this project, we would have a Dockerfile and a Kubernetes YAML file. And so if we had multiple projects inside this repository, we would end up with multiple Docker files and multiple Kubernetes YAML files. Now, that's okay. Probably for each website that we deploy, we'll have a unique Docker file and a unique Kubernetes YAML file. That unique Kubernetes YAML file will specify all of the particulars for this website, including the number of replicas, the number of instances, and also the resource limits, so that we can say that this site needs more or less than the others. So if you have multiple projects, you'll have multiple Kubernetes YAML files, multiple Docker files, multiple Docker ignore files, one for each of the projects within your solution. Now, if you have one solution file that builds multiple projects, maybe it builds a website together with dependent libraries, then that would be a different way to go. At that point, you would probably want to, here inside the top of your Docker file, copy in not only the level up devops.cs proj, but probably also copy in the solution file. Now, at that point, you're probably copying in the CS proj into a folder. And so it'll probably be something like this. And I would then copy in each of those project files into place. Now, I could say, wow, that was too much work. I'm just going to go back to doing a .NET restore after I copy in everything. And that is a completely acceptable solution as well. At that point, let's come back here. I am copying in all of my manifest files for all of the projects inside of the solution. Then I'm running .NET Restore, I'm running .NET Build. Here in .NET Publish, I probably need to tell it which project I'm going to publish. So I'll need to, let's come in here and we'll say level up DevOps, level up devops.cs proj, and that will publish only that one project. Does that answer your question about using multiple builds? Or building multiple projects, rather?
Yes, awesome. Thank you.
Great. Now, there is one more piece. We did step in here and we created a build for the main branch. Now, what if we also want to build our develop branch? Well, we can come in here, we can copy this. Let's create a new file. And in this case, we're going to say this is for the develop branch. And now, instead of using the ACR URL, we can say the develop ACR URL, the develop username, the develop password. We'll use the develop kubeconfig. Now, that's interesting. Here in settings, though, we have a new option that GitHub just came out with not too long ago. If I come in here to settings and I come in here to secrets, we do have environment-specific secrets. Now, the beauty here is that these are environment-specific. Now, an environment, as defined by GitHub, is a branch name. So I can create new secrets for my develop branch, and different secrets for my main branch, and I can then identify each of those secrets in the place that I need them. At that point, I don't need a separate build for this. I'm using the same secret name in all of the places. The only difference then is that this branch is for the develop branch. Well, I can come in here and I can say, I would like this to build for both the main branch and the develop branch. Okay. Now it's going to use the environment-specific secrets to be able to build both of those branches, and they'll go to their respective environments. If it's a develop build, it will deploy to the develop cluster. And if it's a production build, it will go to the production cluster. Now, let's also do one for pull requests. So I'm going to create a new file, and let's create this one for pull requests. Docker build pull requests. Now, in this case, I'm going to say I want this not on the main branch and not on the develop branch. I believe that's the syntax. That may not be quite right. And that will build on all of the branches that aren't those. I also want to build on pull request. Now I'll give it the branches. And in this case, I want it to build on all branches. So if you do a pull request to any branch at all, then I'll kick off this build. Now, in the case of a pull request build, I probably don't want to start this inside of Kubernetes. So let's delete that one. Now, because we're not running the Kubernetes YAML file, we can probably also eliminate the process of replacing all of those secrets. We also don't need to log into Kubernetes because, well, we don't want to deploy this into an environment. We just want to validate that the build works. We still want to do all of our Docker build content. We want to do the build, run all the unit tests, publish it, make that production image. We just don't want to run that production image. And we also probably don't want to push that production image because, well, we're just validating that it works. So to that end, we don't even need to tag it with our registry URL. In this case, let's call it Level Up DevOps PR. Now that we're not pushing anything to our container registry, we don't need to log into our container registry. And now we have a much simpler build that will work great for pull requests and for any other branch that is not main or develop. It'll just check out the content and it will run the Docker build, tagging it with, well, in this case, we wouldn't even need to tag it if we didn't want to. But it's kind of nice to be able to run that process and just make sure it'll work as expected. Now, it's still going to do all of these tasks. It will copy in our manifest, .NET Restore, .NET Build, .NET Test. This is crucial because it'll run all of our unit tests. And that's really what we want to validate inside of our pull request, is that it builds the way we expect. Finally, it'll publish this into this new server image that we can then validate will work as expected. Now, maybe we want to run some Cypress tests that fire up this image and run some content against it. And we could definitely do that in this pull request build as well, just add it as another step here. But this pull request build then just does all of the validation pieces. It doesn't actually start anything. And we just save this into our GitHub workflows folder. We'll call this dockerpr.yaml. And now we have a second file that will handle all of those other builds. Question from a YouTube viewer. I'm having difficulty seeing. Oh, how is this better than Microsoft DevOps, Visual Studio Team System, or on-prem version, TFS Foundation Server? Good question. How is this better? Well, the cool part about GitHub Actions, if you've ever used the YAML builds inside of Azure DevOps, then this, let me come in here. I'll go the other way. This build definition looks a lot like an Azure DevOps YAML file. So it turns out that this GitHub Actions build system is actually a fork of Azure DevOps. The Azure DevOps team built GitHub Actions. So how is this better or worse? It's baked into your source code repository in a way that is really elegant. But if you're successful with Azure DevOps or with Jenkins or with GitLab, then that's definitely where you can find success. And you don't need to move to GitHub Actions to do that. What I really like is that this mechanism was just really elegant to put together, really simple, and I get a certain number of free build minutes per month. So I just outsourced my build server. I don't need hardware on premise. I don't need to prop up my servers. I don't need to run Windows updates on them. GitHub just solves it for me. For me, that is really, really beneficial and why I've chosen to move from Azure DevOps to GitHub Actions. Great question. How can we pull our secrets from Azure Key Vault? That is wonderful. The short answer is I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out after this because I definitely want to figure out how to do that. That's really cool. I've always just put my secrets inside of GitHub Actions and done it that way. But let's come in here and let's see if we can find a task that will pull this. Azure Key Vault. Ooh, Azure Key Vault gets secrets. That's perfect. The name of the Azure Key Vault and the name of the secret to be fetched. We can just copy this in place and set it here, and that will pull in our secrets. Great suggestion. I love it. One of the questions that I often get here is, well, what if I want to deploy to Amazon or Google instead of to Azure? Now, what's really interesting about this is that nothing in this build is really Azure specific. Now, I've chosen to name my secrets Azure Container Registry URL and Azure Container Registry username and password and Azure Kubernetes service URL, but I'm just running Docker and Kubernetes commands. All of these commands are identical in every cloud. If you wanted to push to Amazon instead of to Azure, then you can create a secret that pushes to Amazon's container registry or to Google's container registry or Kubernetes service. And at that point, you're deploying to those services instead. There's nothing that is cloud specific here. Yes, I did choose to use the task that was called Azure/Kubernetes set context, but all it did was set the context. It too wasn't Azure specific. Ooh, there might be an additional step required in case of Azure Key Vault to grant access permissions to retrieve the secrets, apart from specifying the RBAC role. Good call. Yes, I'm going to have to, after this talk, go figure out the magic of how this Key Vault works. Because, yeah, if I can just specify the Key Vault and the secrets, it feels like there's one more piece that is grant GitHub the permissions there. Good call. These are great questions. What else would you like to discover as we dig into building with Kubernetes and Docker?
Hey everyone, if you have any questions, you can unmute and can ask directly to Rob.
Meanwhile, let's also push this new build. What did I do in here? Oh, I did that. Nope, went too far. There we go. Let's commit these changes. We're going to build on the main and develop branch, and we're also going to put in our new pull request build. Git push origin main. Ooh, because we pushed to the main branch, it's actually kicking off a new build. That's perfect.
Can we add a approval before applying the Kubernetes?
Can I add a what? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you very well. An approval.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know.
If I wanted to add an approval, let's actually jump into this editor. Edit. Create manual approval issue. Now, the cool part about this task is that it will create an approval and kind of pause this build until that approval works. Now, this is a task where, let me indent that correctly. It will create an issue, and once that issue is approved, then it will continue with the build, which is perfect. Now, in this case, I did the approval before I actually kicked off the build. That isn't exactly what you were looking for. What you were looking for was after we push this to the registry before we do this. Okay, so let's split this task in half. Let's put half of it before the approval and half of it after the approval. So before the approval, we'll do the Docker build and push. And after the approval, we will do the Kubernetes apply. Kubernetes apply. And now we're doing that manual approval process, and then we're running that in Kubernetes. The cool part is we've stopped and waited for the approval. The bummer part is that can be somewhat time consuming. What I hope is in time, the approvers will say, yeah, that's good. If the unit tests validate that it's okay, and our integration tests prove that we don't have any regressions, let's just deploy them. But in the case of a manual approval, this is exactly how I would do it. Great question. Can I share my thoughts on GitOps? I love GitOps. I really like the idea of being able to build and commit this content and have that in a repository that automatically provisions production content. In this case, we're doing a little bit of magic to say the thing that should be in Kubernetes is the one that built last. But the added value of GitOps is that we can commit the resources that we're about to deploy. And then we have an agent that just monitors that GitHub repository and automatically deploys it. Now, it is a level of complexity. And so if you don't have that problem, then you probably don't need this solution. But if you do have that problem of needing to audit exactly what's deployed everywhere, then GitOps is a perfect solution for that. In particular, GitOps will create a second repository. So here's our repository for source code. We'll have a second repository for all of the content that we've deployed. Now, maybe we choose to make that second repository a private repository, maybe an on-prem repository, to make sure that it's secure because, well, we might have baked some secrets into our containers or into our Kubernetes YAML files that we need to be able to keep secure. That was a great question. Thanks for that.
Hey everyone, if you have any other questions, so you can ask or yeah. Thank you, Rob. I think it was really a nice session. You made my day. It was really good live demo. We really love it and hope to have some few more sessions in future for you. Yeah.
Yeah, I had so much fun.
Yeah.
There's the link to the code just in case. And if possible, let's cross-post that to YouTube as well. But this was so much fun being able to share this DevOps pipeline with you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob. It's really great to see you, and really nice demo. And hey guys, if you have any questions related to Rob, means like if you are going to try later on, so please you can put on the Twitter, or maybe you can reach one of us so we can uh, convey your message to Rob. So
yeah.
Thanks
and if you find a question later, tomorrow, or you're watching this video later, hit me up on Twitter at Rob_Rich, and let's continue the conversation. I'd love to join you.
Thank you, Rob. Have a great weekend, and thanks everyone for joining today. So this session is already recorded, and it's on our YouTube. And if you have any questions, so you can put there also. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.